Ready, Nick? Good afternoon and welcome to the Finance Budget and Personnel Committee meeting Tuesday, January 4th, 2022. And the first order of business is identify any potential conflicts of interest. You've seen the packet, it's before you. Are there any conflicts you need to report? If not, we'll move on to the next item, and that is citizen comments. Do we have any comments from the citizens? Second call? Last call? We'll move on to the consent agenda. On the consent agenda tonight, we have the minutes of the December 21st, 2021 meeting, the monthly position control report, the bills, and the payroll. Have you read them, and what's your wishes? Motion by Paschal to approve, second by Wetzel. Discussion? There being none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
And it is approved. Request to recommend council approval of compensation evaluation results and establish a pay grade for permanent part-time senior center coordinator, presented by Jen Raku. Jen?
Thank you. In your packet, you'll find a copy of the job description that was approved back on November 16th by the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee in regard to the position. As you might recall, this was a seasonal position that is moving into a part-time permanent position on the pay scale. We did submit this to McGrath for review, and when we reviewed the position, you'll note on our current pay scale that the pay scale actually starts at a rate of $16.68. The range for this position with McGrath actually was a bit lower than that, starting at $14.57. And so what you'll see in your packet is two things. The first scenario is the request to approve this position into a new pay grade that's being established for pay grade 110. And then the following agenda item is going to be a review of the compensation plan to include these new pay scale brackets into the plan. So at this point, based on the analysis, what we are looking to do is move this senior coordinator to a permanent part-time position in pay grade 110, effective immediately.
What's your pleasure? Mr. Wetzel?
Do we need to table this until we do the second action on the second item so that we actually have it 110 pay grade? And if that's the case, I would move to table until we discuss the next item.
Would there be any objection to doing that? Without objection, we'll accept the table and move on to the next item, which is related. And that is the, what?
I'll second.
Yeah, second it, yeah. Without objection, right? Okay. And so Jen, that is, so we're moving on to 8, which is, 7. Request to recommend council approval of an adjustment to the city's current compensation.
Certainly. So with the new senior coordinator position moving from the seasonal casual pay scale into the permanent pay scale, as I mentioned, we are looking at creating 2 new pay grades to add to our current compensation program. There would be pay grade 110 and pay grade 115. It would follow the typical 15-point scale. And ultimately, the reason why we looked at adding 2 different pay scales is there's been a lot of talk over the last several years in terms of whether or not at some point there's going to be an adjustment to the federal minimum wage, which would move the wage to $15 an hour at the minimum. In the event that something like that should go forward, we're prepared and looking ahead. We would put this position in pay grade 110 right now. We do have pay grade 115 available in the event that we have to make any adjustments in the future, or if we have any new positions that would fall into that pay scale. So what we're looking at in your packet is a revised pay scale, as well as the summary of pay grade 110 and 115. Staff is requesting approval of adding pay grade 110 and 115 to our current compensation scale.
Mr. Wetzel, you have comments?
I have a question, I guess. You know, I understand your explanation for the reason for having a 115. However, I guess I see a ripple effect happening if the law goes into effect, bumping the minimum wage. A ripple effect that if the senior coordinator then gets moved to 115, does that move everybody up a pay scale? Or do we instead have to maybe look at the entire pay scale and make adjustments so that somebody like an accounting clerk at 120 doesn't get moved to 121, but instead the whole scale gets moved? So I'm not, I guess, understanding fully the justification for the 115 at this point, other than we're preparing in the off chance of this change, which is going to affect everybody, and I think we can address that if and when that occurs. So I would have no problem with approving 110. I'm just a little bit wondering about the 115, sort of seeming like it's a random, somewhere in the middle, we'll throw this scale in there.
Yeah, and we do have a need for these lower level pay grades in the scale. We do have this particular senior coordinator position. There is a couple of other positions within the city that I think we need to continue to evaluate to see if they would move into one of these. If that's the case, they may or may not hit pay grade 114 or 115. So it really is proactive. If you choose not to put that in, that's perfectly acceptable. We can just put pay grade 110 in. In the event that we ever needed to create pay grade 115 in the future, we would have it ready to go.
All right, follow up. My guess is that if we are looking at moving some of these positions into these lower pay grades, as you were mentioning, that McGrath is going to be involved.
Correct.
And they may not, they may decide that 1559 for pay grade 115 is not a good base or a good starting point. 1732 is not a good midpoint. They may decide it's $18. Does that mean we have to then make a 116 that has a little bit higher? Or do we just leave it be? I guess with that in mind, my motion would be to approve creating a pay grade 110 only. And I would at that point stop, because I think that once we would look at the other positions moving into lower pay grades, we let McGrath decide, and then we base those pay grades on actual positions, not just a possibility. So that would be my motion. Approve.
Yeah, you've got a
approve
motion.
110.
Is there a second? For the sake of discussion, I'll second that. Did you want to comment,
Yeah.
Nick?
Rose had her hand up.
I guess I would somewhat disagree with that because, by establishing, currently, we would be establishing 110 as basically our lowest pay level. And, if at some point we are required to have a 115, that would then become our lowest pay level, but it wouldn't necessarily mean that all of our other pay levels are out of whack, so to speak. It would mean that just that our minimum has to change. And I think that being prepared is, by having the pay scale already available to us, prevents having to come back again and establishing a new minimum.
Rebecca, I'm sorry.
I'm just listening.
Go ahead.
How was 115 determined? Because if we're simply worried about hitting a $15 minimum wage, why is the level one of 1559? How is that determined? Why not just $15?
Sure. So both of the pay grades were recommended by McGrath, who had worked on our original scale. I did not ask her that particular question, but my assumption would be is when we looked at the pay grades and the compensation scale earlier, there is typically a range between each level of pay grade. And so if you look at pay grade 110 starting at 1457, pay grade 115 would be 1559, pay grade 120, which is our next, starts at 1668. It's kind of that almost about $1 in between each one, and it keeps a consistent step and scale between each pay grade. And so I believe that's probably had something to do with it, but her justification in terms of putting it in was it helped us to be prepared in the event those changes would go through in the future. Right now, the pay grade would not have anything assigned to it.
And I go back to my argument before of if the senior coordinator is at a pay grade 110, but we have to bump the senior coordinator up to a 115 because of a minimum wage change, then that makes the difference between the senior coordinator and all of the ones at the 120 level be that much closer. When in fact, if McGrath has done their work here and has determined that the actual difference should be about $2 an hour difference, that's where I'm saying it's going to have a ripple effect, where if we're bumping up the senior coordinator by $1, it means we have to bump everybody up by $1. It just seems like it's something we could cross when we get to it, but I'll stop arguing at that point.
I want to get in here just a little bit, because I can understand what you're talking about with the ripple effect.
Yeah.
And if we have the pay scale as it is now, And then all of a sudden, the $15 minimum wage comes in. And we determine that we have to abandon essentially 110, because 110 starts out lower than the minimum, the federal minimum at that point. Are we then saying that the rest of the pay scale gets booted up by that same percentage between 1457 and 1559 in order to make it equitable across the board? I think we do, and I can hear you making that argument right now.
Yeah, I don't think that would probably be the case. Every position, when you go through a compensation evaluation, has a market rate established for it, and so it doesn't necessarily have a trickle-down effect. So I wouldn't necessarily say that we would look at those. Anyone that would be below, in the event that that should happen, would be below the $15 mark, that would have to look. Another resolution to that would be, the fact is we move people up in steps on the current pay scale 110, because we have $15 an hour built into that, or more. So there would be additional options for you. Again, I think this was probably just looking at, when you look at steps 120, 121, 122, you're going to see a kind of a same level variation between the percentage of the steps. And it's not totally consistent. There are some that are 5%, and then there are a few that are 8%. But you'll see kind of where those change if you actually compare midpoint to midpoint throughout that scale. I don't have that information in front of me, or I could tell you exactly what.
I think the only reason that I tend to agree with Mr. Wetzel's motion is that I would like to see what happens when and if, and by the way, you don't have to have this codified into policy. It can be sitting on the shelf and ready to go if that comes up. And if those are the arguments you're going to make, which I don't really believe, but, I believe I believe it's going to make a ripple effect, just like changing the CIP, the cost of living in the pay scale as a whole. So that's why I'm sort of leaning towards supporting his motion. And by the way, it doesn't hurt anything if you don't have it codified, does it?
It won't change anything.
Excuse me?
It won't change anything at this point.
Okay. Okay, any other discussion? Okay, the motion is to go with, to approve only 110 at this point. Was that, did you link that to the other issue, Mr. Wetzel? Of the first issue?
No, I just wanted to make sure we took action on this prior to going back and.
Okay, so it's
action the
only on the
Just this
second
one.
issue?
Yep.
Yes. We're gonna have to go back to item number
Yep.
6, right? Okay, so all those in favor of Mr. Wetzel's motion, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay. So the motion carries. Okay, so we'll go, so we've established a 110 only. We're gonna go back to item number 6, request to recommend council approval of compensation evaluation results and establish a pay grade for permanent PT senior center coordinator position. Mr. Wetzel,
Move to approve.
move to approve, second by
I'll second.
Mr. Paschal. Discussion. There being no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I think that was an aye from Becky, I think. So, okay. Okay, so we've gone number 6 and number 7. Number 8, request to recommend council approval of policy number 3.980, COVID-19 vaccination policy. And Jen, this is the Jen show tonight, so go ahead.
Thank you. So actually, there's a little bit of a variation. Initially, we were going to be looking at a policy based on the circumstances that are going on with the stay order that was approved by OSHA, and then the hearing that's coming up with the Supreme Court. There's not enough information to build that policy or get it to a final draft stand at this point. So what I wanted to do tonight instead is to bring forward a request to collect proof of vaccination status from our employees. So, back to the spirit of being proactive. Right now, the city is not subject to the emergency temporary order that is in place under OSHA. We don't actually fall under OSHA. We fall under the Department of Safety and Professional Services. So private employers with more than 100 employees are the people that are subjected to this ETS going forward. As a public employer, we're not. However, we are a facility that has more than 100 employees. And so in looking forward, knowing that in the event that this is approved, we want to at least be prepared so that if it rolls to us, that we are prepared to be able to implement something similar that might come down the road. So with that in your packet, you're going to see a little bit of background information. And with the ETS that's currently in place and waiting to be heard by the Supreme Court, you're going to see there are 8 items that are being requested that employers start to prepare for. Number 3 on this list says maintain records and roster of vaccination status for each employees. So although they don't currently affect us, these, the ETS right now is going to be heard on the 7th of January. We don't know exactly how soon we're going to get a decision from that, but with the state of COVID, I think people are hopeful that there'll be a decision from the Supreme Court soon. And so as that would potentially roll forward, what we wanted to do is, again, plan ahead and figure out where our status is. There are many steps that would need to be taken in order to be included. So in the analysis in your record, you're going to see that we've created a process basically to collect vaccination status for employees. And this would only at this point be non-represented employees. For police and fire, actually no police or fire represented or non, only because they fall under Police and Fire Commission, and not library employees. So the rest of the city would be included. And what we'd be doing is looking for vaccination status either through a record from a pharmacy, a copy of their COVID card, medical records that document vaccination, a copy of their immunization record from a public health department, or any type of other vaccination. And then there's also a way where people could do basically an affidavit to tell us what their status is. So as we're going forward, again, this isn't something that has to be done today, but we wanted to put some timelines in to at least get a plan in place. So what I was recommending is that we approve the collection of this information by January 21st. So in the event more information comes out and rolls forward, we're prepared to take necessary action in regard to putting a requirement in place.
What's your pleasure? Nick?
I guess I have a question for.
Is your microphone on?
It is. I guess I have a question first that, what's the ramifications for an employee who refuses to provide the information?
I don't know that there's a ramification. Well, there is no ramification today. I can tell you when we have somebody who is exposed to COVID or has an exposure at work or has symptoms, if someone doesn't want to disclose their vaccination status, you know, we do ask that question as we go through the process of notifications. What we do is we treat anyone who doesn't want to share as a positive, or someone who decides not to take a test as a positive. Somebody who doesn't want to share their vaccination status is counted as unvaccinated. So that's how we've handled things to this date. This would, again, I don't know that there's a unnecessary penalty, but the goal would be to collect these from everyone.
But there is no ramification if they don't.
We haven't talked about a ramification for it at this point.
Go ahead, Nick. You still...
With that in mind, I guess I would move that we recommend the collection of the information on vaccinations on a voluntary basis without a requirement from the employees at this point.
Is there a second? Second by Mr. Handler. Discussion. Mr. Wetzel.
It bothers me that we're breaking apart the staff into, you're an employee, so you have to provide your information. Oh, but you work for the police department, so you don't. Oh, you work for the fire department, so you don't. Oh, you work for the library, so you don't. But you don't, so you have to, or at least you're recommended to, or we ask you to. I'm also a bit concerned, and I understand that we're saying this is voluntary, but I'm a bit concerned because I know that this is a very hot topic, to the point where I think there are some who are reluctant to state their vaccination status for fear of repercussions. You know, I'm vaccinated. Well, how could you be vaccinated? That's horrible. It's a poison. It's, you know, or I'm not well, how can you not be vaccinated? It's and you hear both sides. And I think that this is such a hot topic that unless we have to implement something because somebody higher up says we have to, I don't even want to touch this. I would just as soon not even go this route because we're differentiating staff based on where you know, what department you work in, and we're touching a hot topic that I think it's very uncomfortable for some people.
Mr. Handler?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I would prefer, as Mr. Witzel is saying, I don't think we should even entertain this particular thought at this point until the courts have decided what we can or can't do. Because I know you're gonna have problems with people, and I know people are gonna get upset about invasion of their privacy. I don't know, but right now it's really a delicate item anywhere. I just wouldn't touch it.
Mr. Wessel, Mr. Paschal, I'm sorry. I'm just used to calling on you.
Again, this is one of those things where I think that we should be getting ahead of ourselves on this. It's likely, something that's likely to occur, and that we shouldn't necessarily be struggling to catch up based on what's occurring. But I do agree that at this point, there should not be a requirement that it takes place, but I think that if an employee of the city, and I think that I agree that I don't think we should be differentiating between police department employees and library employees. I think all employees of the city should be subject to this if they're not subject to it, but should be, if they're willing to provide the information so that we can have a database. I would assume that this is gonna be in Jen's office, and nobody should be judged for it except whatever judgment Jen might have in her own personal feelings, that nobody else needs to know anything about it. So I think that we should be getting ahead of this.
I'm gonna preempt you if you don't mind. I can appreciate Jen's wanting to get the city ahead of the ballgame, and I can appreciate you wanting to do that. On the other hand, we're collecting some pretty sensitive information, as has been noted here by several of you. I'm not sure we should be doing that until we have to, because there's some pretty sensitive information there. And I believe this would fall under HIPAA, if I'm not mistaken. And basically, I don't want us collecting HIPAA information until we absolutely have to. And then the question has to be, what are the courts going to decide, and why are they going to decide it? You know, and at this point, it's a Mississippi riverboat gamble what they're going to do. I have no clue what they're going to do. And I would rather just not have that information collected, and rather not have it lying around here, even though I trust the HR department explicitly with keeping confidentiality. I don't want to take that chance. So somebody else did you want to talk, Jen?
I did, just a couple of things. So, one point I just wanted to make is the intent would be to go to the Police and Fire Commission and the Library Board and have the same request made of them. So we weren't trying to exclude certain groups. It's just that in terms of who would have authority to put something like this through, it fell to the rest. So that was the intent for there. The second piece is, you know, as I said, definitely trying to be proactive with the current stay. The turnaround time for those employers that haven't taken action to this point, in the event that that does go forward, are going to be scrambling. And so when you look at this, this is just one step of a larger process. So it would be collecting of the vaccination status. You're absolutely right that if we did collect that, it would be housed in the employee's medical file. It doesn't get shared with anyone beyond myself and Amy Krogman. It helps us when we're looking at quarantines or different things from that perspective, although that's minor. We ask the employees for that information as we go. And actually, we do get test results in the event that someone is exposed to COVID and test positive. So we do get a lot of this information already. The other things to think about going forward is we're going to have a lot of processes to do when it comes to, in the event a stay like this is mandated. And quite honestly, COVID tracking and contact tracing, those types of things take up a lot of time already. And so I'm a little concerned that you're going to have a tight turnaround time in the event something like this goes forward in terms of trying to collect the data, because another step in this process, in the event that we're mandated, we're going to have a period of time for people to request things like medical or religious accommodations. We're going to have a policy in terms of how each group is treated. We have to have a process in terms of who's going to do the test, who pays for it, what time is off. There's a lot of steps that are involved in this. So this was really just the first step to try to be proactive to start this ball rolling. So in the event that we do need to take action, we're ready. So I certainly can wait if that's what your recommendation is to wait, but I just want you to kind of see the full picture.
One question, though, you mentioned, and I gotta think through this a little bit, but, what happens if, okay, is there an alternative to testing? Or to take that, I mean, is there any, I read this and now I can't remember where I saw it. Is there anything in there that says that if they fail to provide the proof, then they have to do testing or anything like that? Does it not? And also, is there a provision for religious exemptions?
So there is a provision, it would be a medical or a religious exemption. The way the current ETS is that if you are not vaccinated, then you're subject to weekly testing. And I know Steve Bakos is here too. He's really been kind of the other half of COVID, or, you know, kind of the primary in terms of the fire department. And so he has been a tool throughout this process. And we were talking earlier today about the fact that, you know, there is multiple scenarios in terms of how this might roll out. So again, it certainly is your choice if you want to start this process now or if you'd like us to hold off. But, you know, again, it's going to be a process to evolve the entire gamut in the event a stay like this goes through.
Mr. Paschal, your motion provides for it being done on a voluntary basis until the court decides.
Yes.
Side. Okay, thank you. Mr. Witzel.
Thank you. One other entity that hasn't been mentioned, but I would assume would be on their own as well, is Marshfield Utilities. I don't fully understand everything, because I don't need to at this, well, I haven't needed to this point. There are employers who require vaccinations. If you're not vaccinated, you have to have an exemption on file. It has to be an approved exemption, medical or religious. If you don't have one, you're fired, period. But it's my understanding, and maybe I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that the mandate is you have to be vaccinated or you're weekly tested. It's not you have to be vaccinated or fired without an exemption. It's so I guess, I think we're jumping ahead a little too fast. First of all, if we're doing this as a voluntary, okay, so half the staff doesn't want to volunteer their status. So are we any further ahead? Okay, maybe we've gathered a half dozen people, but I see, first of all, the court system has to make a decision, which, if I understand correctly, again, I'm a little fuzzy on all of this because there's so many moving parts. If they make a decision that upholds this requirement, it still doesn't affect us because we're public.
Correct.
So there would be another step that would get to a point where that would be required. So, you know, we don't even know that it's going to be required in the private sector, let alone the public sector. And then when that does happen, we're going to have to still set up a policy, which is going to have to include something about how are we going to gather information? Are we going to require or have to have religious exemptions, or are we just going to simply say either you're vaccinated or you're getting tested? You're making it sound like we're going to have exemptions in place, which again, I'm not really fully thinking we do. So it sounds like this piece that you're trying to get ahead of would actually be a small part of a bigger policy that we would have to decide upon. And I think at that point is when it's a good time to decide what do we want to do. When we have to, and we're going to have plenty of time to do it because we're still that many steps.
It was my understanding, and Jen can correct me on this, but my understanding is that it wouldn't be under the OSHA portion of it, but it would be under the 100-employee rule that they might do that, which it does, doesn't take into consideration public or non-public jobs, right?
It does, actually. So
Oh, it does.
it's private employers with 100 employees or more.
Okay, so even if they approve that, we are
Correct.
still not required unless they specifically.
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for clarifying that. Any further discussion?
Does Mrs. Spiros have any?
Rebecca? Okay.
Okay, I'm just going to say this has been a good discussion, and I am viewing things the same way that Mr. Witzel is.
Is there any other discussion? We have a motion and a second on the floor, and Mr. Paschal, could you restate your motion, or Deb, do you have it?
Yeah, so what I have is to recommend council approval of allowing staff to begin collecting proof of vaccination status on all city of Marshfield staff on a voluntary basis, excluding represented police and fire department employees and library staff.
Not represented. You can take, it's just police and fire.
Non-represented staff?
No, just police, fire, and library.
Okay. Any
Oh,
further
not
discussion?
Represented?
It's all staff.
What is that?
That's right, that's correct with the correct.
Okay. If there's no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
Hey,
And the motion fails 1-4, I think. Was it, Becky, was your vote a yay or a nay?
No.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not, we'll move on to the next item. This one, Jen, you get to give up the floor, I think. Request to recommend council approval of revised policy number 3.430, retirement recognition and extending eligibility to include resignations. Steve, it's up to you.
Thank you. If I sit here long enough, I'm dying to say something, so the next couple items are mine. Now, what you have before you tonight is request to consider revised policy 3.430, retirement recognition. How this came to light, we recently had an employee who had served 10 years with us, but have moved on to take another job. And looking at the policy we have in place right now, it refers to recognition, be it a plaque and or some additional compensation to say thank you for years of service, but only upon retirement for employees. Not resignation to take another position or for some other reason, only actually retiring. And, you know, I wasn't here when that policy was put into place, but I've worked in a number of places, and I just think that that's a mistake. I believe that what we're really trying to do is to thank people for the years of service of 10 years, 20 years, whatever the milestone they've met is, whether they are retiring or whether they have opted for another opportunity in their life. I know I've taken other jobs and you know, been given a plaque to say thanks for my years of service. So my recommendation is approval of a revised policy 3.430, which effectively extends the retirement opportunity for a plaque and or some small monetary compensation to those who resign at those same years of service, 10, 20, or 30. And just to add, elected officials are in there too, if you look at the policy for their years of service. But I just think that the employees ought to be thanked for their service regardless of retirement or resignation.
What's your pleasure? Nick,
I'll make a motion to recommend council approval of revised policy number 3.430.
is there a second? One more time, is there a second? Nick, you want to expound on that, or?
I agree with what Steve said, that I'm familiar with several employees who have left the city of Marshfield's employment for various reasons without going into retirement and not been recognized in any way, shape, or form for their service to the city, and it's left sort of a bad taste in their mouth. That what could have been a simple gesture from the city to recognize their years of service has instead been looked at as goodbye, good riddance, for lack of a better word.
Any further discussion on this? If not, it'll die without a second, and we'll
I have
move
a
on to the
quick
next
comment.
item. Yes. Oh,
Quick
Nick,
comment.
oh, go ahead. Mr. Wetzel.
I'm a little bothered by your goodbye, good riddance comment.
I'm just stating the expression of what I've heard from
Okay.
people who have left in that position.
Because I understand the concept behind this, and I'm not. I'm not gonna say it.
I think the only thing I want to add is, when I read this, I immediately thought, well, gee, that's a great idea, let's go do that. And then I thought, wait. We've had, we've had, aldermen here who have mentioned that they want, the city of Marshfield to be a destination, a career employer, destination employer, somebody that, a place where everybody wants to come and work because we're great, great people, great employers, the whole thing. And that, we want them to give us their career and we'll recognize them when they retire. Basically, removing the distinction between retirement and leaving for a better job is basically sort of counterproductive to that's the idea. We basically want them to stay here and grab the brass ring. We really do. And that's why I was a little bit troubled by this. And I just don't see, it as, I mean, if they retire, that's one thing. If they're leaving for a better job, they're telling us they don't like us. Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you. I appreciate what you're saying, but I would be thinking that if it was a smaller length of time, if we were saying, hey, look, not only are we going to recognize for retirement, but if you're here even 3 years or whatever, but I just believe, and again, it's a personal belief, that if you give 10 years of your life to an organization and do everything you can to make it better, and somehow opportunities come up somewhere else for another job, that you really have made a serious commitment. You haven't retired here, you haven't gotten the gold watch here, but you've done something that I honestly think you ought to have a plaque to put up to say, thank you for your service to the city of Marshfield. Whether it was 10 years in retirement and then 10 years versus 10 years with resignation. That's just a personal belief.
Mr. Witzel?
I understand what you're saying. I just struggle with 10 years, because that seems like a small amount of time. I'm somebody who gets a job fresh out of college or fresh out of high school or whatever it is, and I work for the city for 10 years and I really develop some great skills, and I jump off and I go off to the private sector because I'm gonna make a boat ton more money, but yet I'm gonna get recognized like I gave my whole life to the city. Well, it's only 10 years. 20 years, yeah, I can maybe understand that, but you know, as a person in employment, I could work 4 jobs for 10 years each, and that could make up my professional life. And I could work 5 jobs if I got a job fresh out of high school and didn't retire till I was 68. So 10 years seems like a really small time to just suddenly leave employment here because I'm offered a better job, but then be recognized like I did all this. I don't know, the city did a lot for me by giving me 10 years of experience so that I was more marketable to the private sector. It just doesn't seem to me like that small of an amount, and I guess maybe in today's day and age where people are jumping jobs as much as they are, maybe it is a significant amount, but to me, it just doesn't seem like it.
Okay, I've got, Ms. Spiros. Becky, you're on.
Hey, thanks. This struck me really odd when I read it in our packet, to be quite honest with you. I don't think I've ever worked anywhere that does that. They do recognize retirement, but when someone leaves to take a better job or a better position, I've never seen that. I will say that in general, people who stay with a company, whether they stay with the city, whoever, for 10 years, usually when they announce they're going to leave, I think the departments generally recognize that person by having, a going away party or a get together, or they do something. So this just seemed a little odd to me, and I think that we should save it for retirements only.
Nick, you're up.
Yeah, I don't know, I wouldn't be what you would call a job hopper, but, I have left a couple of positions in my life where it was far less than 10 years and I received a recognition. And I guess if I really thought about it, I probably value those recognitions just as much as the one I got from the city of Marshfield when I left after 29 years. So I'm guessing that nobody's gonna stick around to get a plaque and a gift certificate if they have a better opportunity, but I think it's nice to recognize people for their work.
Is there any further discussion or talk on this issue? If not, we'll move on to item number 10.
I made a motion.
What?
Oh, that-
Died for lack of a second. Yeah. A request to recommend council approval to modify requirement for committee council approval to refill vacant positions. Steve?
Thank you. It was about 3 years ago, when largely prompted by some of the TIF transfer issues we were facing and some of the financial struggles that we saw upon us, that this committee directed that all refilling of all positions be brought before you for consideration of refilling them, as opposed to not doing so. And that was obviously to make sure that we were being financially prudent, look at opportunities for, is there a way to combine positions, or is that position really needed in hard times? The history we really had, though, during the 3 years, and there've been a lot of refilling opportunities brought before you, that they've all been approved, some with a fair amount of discussion, others with very little discussion, but there haven't been any rejected to the best of my knowledge. And our finances have improved. Certainly, we have some struggles left in front of us. We're still dealing with some structural budget issues we're digging ourselves out of, but we've come a long ways. And I guess my thought in talking with staff is that it may be more appropriate to look at some sort of a modified approach that would not have every single refilling come before you. And part of this is being driven by the timeline of the recruitment process. You know, we have, for example, in the last few weeks or a couple of months, we've had the finance director position, the wastewater superintendent, and some of these that we know we're going to refill. We're going to have a wastewater superintendent. We're going to have a finance director. And yet the timing of bringing it before you and getting council to stamp approval on your direction through the consent agenda, you know, you add 3 weeks to the process, and then sometimes I've had elected officials say to me, boy, it seems like a long time. When are we going to get the replacement for so-and-so? And we're still kind of going through the recruitment hoops, and part of it is because we had to get your blessing. And I realize some are more slam dunks and others maybe not so slam dunks, that you really want to give a deeper review. So I thought I'd bring forward a proposal to you to modify what we do right now a little bit, and you found it in your packet, but I'm going to read through it. I'm suggesting that we look at not requiring finance, budget, and personnel and council approval for refilling vacant positions, except as follows. Obviously, if the position is new or has been vacant for 6 months. If a position has been vacant for several months, it almost implies that we ought to do a review to see whether or not that refilling is absolutely needed. Or if a revised job description and possibly pay grade review has been proposed. Or, and my intent is to send you an immediate notice of when a vacancy is created through a resignation, that you would have the opportunity, a member of this committee, to say, hey, Steve, I really think we got to have this on the next agenda, no questions asked, because this is one that I think is worth looking at as to whether there's another way to do it, if there's an opportunity for some type of modified approach with those work duties. Or finally, if it's been previously identified by staff or by the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee as one that when it does come available, or a department that we want to look at where there might be some structural opportunities, that if that's the case, we've got it in the hopper, and we make a note definitely when a position in that capacity comes up, we want to review it. Now, please know when I say this, that every time a position becomes available, department and division heads talk to each other, they look at their needs. We had, for example, Ron Ullman left a position vacant for quite a while because he was questioning whether or not we needed to refill it. So we do examine it. We do look for ways to try and be creative in terms of merging duties. We did that with one of the front office staff between clerk's office and public works. And that's worked out really well for us. It's basically 50% clerk's office, 50% public works. So those kind of assessments go on all the time. What we're trying to do is two things. One is minimize you seeing a parade of people coming forward asking for refilling if it's not necessary. And number two, trying to expedite where we can the rehiring process so that something that could be done in 2 months doesn't take 3 months, for lack of a better phraseology. And so that is my recommendation, that you consider recommending to the council to adopt this approach with the caveats listed in the conditions noted.
Thank you. Discussion or motion?
I'll make a motion to recommend the council approval to modify the requirement for committee council approval to fill recent vacant.
Is there a second?
Vacant position.
I'll tell you what, I'll second that so we can discuss it anyway, okay? Yeah, Mr. Wetzel.
Thank you. I'm against this, and I'll explain why. First of all, I think that though, as you stated, we have approved every single position that's coming before us. I think that by simply having the understanding that any position to be filled is going to come before this committee, and that we're potentially going to be scrutinizing that request, I think has allowed staff to sharpen their pencils. And perhaps, and I'm not saying that this is the reason, but perhaps the reason Ron Almond left the position open was because he had to, in his own mind, figure out what justification would he have for that position. So if it was a slam dunk, oh, we got an open position, let's quick hire, that's not gonna cause perhaps that pause in some of those positions to decide, is this something that's really, really necessary? We're not out of the woods financially. We have tightened our belt so much and we have so many things that we would like to see happen that we're not out of the woods. We just had another tax hike. Fairly, not necessarily as big as it was a year and a half ago or a year ago, but still a pretty significant tax hike. I don't want to see us just give a green light to say, let's go ahead and do stuff. Some of your caveats are fine, but we don't necessarily fully notice when somebody has left employment. So we don't necessarily know immediately unless we're looking at the control report at the, before the meeting, and then, oh, wait a minute, there was that position and all of a sudden it was hired and I didn't have a chance to say, hold the phone, I want that on an agenda. I think that there's good justification for us to continue the policy as we've been doing it. And the other little example I want to give is in the library, we recently approved a combining of several positions. I'm not certain that would have been, I think if we'd have been filling positions as they opened up, we wouldn't have had that opportunity to say, maybe a combining of these positions is a better option. So I think there's good reason, even though we have given you approval for every single position that's come forth. I think that there's been good activity surrounding what happens prior to those approvals, and I'd like to see that continue.
Steve?
Yeah, I think you made some good points, Tom. Let me just add to it, though, a couple things. First of all, as I put in that one caveat or one condition, it would be incumbent upon me to immediately notify you so that you had a chance to ask that it be put on an agenda. There maybe be a hold period in which a member of this body could say, I want this on the next agenda. I don't think we should just run out and hire another person to replace that building inspector or that street worker or whatever, and it would be on. The other thing I want to say is that the library example, maybe it's something I should have put in here. Anytime there's a proposal to combine positions or rework something, like Jill Porter did, turning 3 into a full-time position to get a better, those are obviously going to have to come before you. Those are modifying the structure of a department. So I didn't put that in there. Maybe that could be added. If you're ultimately against it for the reason you first noted, that you believe it's important that this body review all of them, I get that, and that's fine. I just want to make sure that you understand that that we're not trying to put things past you that shouldn't be. And I think that restructuring that Jill was doing would be an example of something that would have to come before you.
If I may follow up.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The combining of positions may not have happened or may not have even been considered if we were filling positions as they became vacant. That was my argument there. So, I have a part-time position, let's quick hire. I have another part-time position, let's quick hire. If we have a part-time position and now I have to come and justify the position to a body, wait a minute, I'm gonna also have, like I said, it pauses the situation. It allows some reflection on what are we trying to do, where are we trying to go. It forces, as I mentioned before, the sharpening of the pencil of how am I gonna justify this refilling of this position? Obviously, wastewater manager, slam dunk. I don't think we had any argument. Sorry to see you go, Sam, but yeah, we're approving it. Finance director, same thing. It was a slam dunk. We're really sorry to see you go, Ron, but yeah, let's hire. Other positions, is it possible? It's that discussion that we have here that I think forces department heads to say, they're gonna ask me these questions. I need to make sure I can justify those. And it maybe pauses maybe I can leave that position open for a little longer. Obviously, when we had taxes coming up, we had to hire some more finance people. Yeah, it's busy time. Let's get somebody in here. And maybe that was slowed up a little bit by us having to approve that. But I still think there's valid reason, and with our belt still tightened, I think there's valid reason for those things to still come to this committee.
I want to add that there's another side of that coin too. And I just saw Jill pop up. I don't know what she popped in to see what we were talking about or what, but the other side of the coin was that you will remember that at a couple of times we saw lots of turnover going in one particular department, and we asked for a special look at that.
True.
Yeah, that's something this did. This red flagged it and said there was something going on here that we want to take a look at. And that's our right to do. So for that reason alone, I think that if the staff knows and understands that everything has to come to us, they're going to be very, very careful about it, which I think you are. But I think removing that would allow a certain amount of indulgence on our part that I'm not ready to give. So that's where I'm coming from on this. I'm sorry, Jill, did you want to be recognized? I'm sorry.
I guess the one thing that made me pop on, and I have been listening to the entire discussion, but I do want it noted that with the combining of the positions, I did not wait to fill those positions because I was afraid to come to you and ask for it or afraid that they were out of line. These are positions that were approved by the library board. The combining of the positions is part of our strategic initiative, try to get staff to stay longer. And when we have a number of positions that don't pay any benefits or limited benefits, it's very, very difficult for me to keep staff. That is why I waited. And, you know, in some sense, COVID has helped us out because our numbers are down here a little bit. So we could do without a part-time staff member for a while until we could combine those positions. But it was not because I was afraid or worried about coming to you thinking, you know, for some frivolous reason, fill a position.
Thank you, Jill. Deb?
I don't usually talk, but I want to just make a couple comments. While I respect what you have said, I do have to disagree with what you've said. I think as staff, we have proven that we work as hard as we can and as efficiently as we can. We're always trying to make our budgets go as far as we can. And as far as staffing, it's very hard when you have a small department and you're waiting 2 to 3 months to get a position filled. It causes a lot of stress for the remaining employees that are taking on those duties. We're just trying to find a way to shorten that time frame. And we work together all the time. We have department head meetings, we have leadership meetings, we work together, we strategize. We try to make it as efficiently as possible. I've been here for a lot of years, and our staffing levels have very rarely changed. Actually, it went down for many years. We have gone up, but we've never gone over that 200 mark. We're always being asked to do more, whether it's from state level, federal government, whatever, to do more with less. So by having the special programs that we get permission from the Common Council to purchase, and by working together to get these duties accomplished. So I really take offense to saying that because we're not coming to you to get approval that we're going to quit doing that, because we do that on a daily basis.
We have Mr. Handler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I look at this from a elected official standpoint. As an official, we need to make decisions. And I like the fact that you have to come to us on these matters. Because if we don't, we're kind of cut out of the communication aspect of it. We'll know it becomes a fact after the fact. And I want to stay in the same position to have you come to us to have things through. And very seldom, by your own admission, do we turn things down. But we want to be informed and we want to be part of the process. And without it, I feel very uncomfortable.
Thank you. Mr. Wetzel.
One quick question. How long, we have committee meetings every other week. How long does it get delayed to have a position filled because you come in front of this body?
Jen.
Yeah, it depends upon when the resignation comes in. So depending on the day we get the resignation, it holds to the next meeting.
So it's a
1
2-week
to,
delay?
1 to 2
Two-week
weeks.
delay?
Yeah, 2 weeks is probably a good guess, because
The
if you,
longest.
if you think about it, I mean, we have the timing of agendas too, so if somebody turns in their resignation on Friday, the agenda's gone out, whatever. But 2 weeks is a pretty good rough guess, and 2 weeks doesn't seem like a lot, and I respect what you're saying about wanting to review all the requests to refill. But, you know, it does add to the recruitment timeline, and especially for some of the positions we know that we're gonna refill, it does make it seem longer waiting for some of the key positions. I know Josh had one for quite a while with city planner, and Deb has had hers in a small department, and I think, I'll just finish, then I'll let you go here if it's okay. I would be, in my position, in working with our staff, I would be remiss, I think, at this point after 3 years and not bringing it forward, based upon your not having rejected any request, and based upon the additional timeline to a sometimes cumbersome recruitment process. If you choose not to do that, I respect that, I do. But I think that, and Deb made some good points about how we constantly review the need for those replacements at staff level. But again, it's your call, I respect your decision.
There's a motion and a second on the floor. What, yes, Mr. Wetzel?
One final comment. I'm going to vote no on this. However, because I'm hearing some of the things that are being spoken, I would like to see, if this should fail, I would like to see a new proposal, and I would like to have certain things in consideration for that new proposal, such as perhaps some automatic approvals, if you will, of perhaps some key department head type or high, I don't want to say high level, but some key positions like,
Leadership level.
yeah, leadership or those key positions. Or for certain departments within the city that are very short-staffed that we know we just have to simply refill. I would like to see some of those things identified as caveats or exemptions to having things approved by this body. But I think, as was mentioned, I still have the concern, as Mr. Wagner mentioned, we wouldn't know about street turnover if things were just getting constantly approved. So I think some bigger departments need to perhaps have things brought forth so that we can keep track of what's happening and see trends. So I will vote against this. If it fails, I would like to see it come back in 2 weeks with some revisions.
We have a motion and a second on the floor. Steve?
I'm sorry, I'm just gonna say this because, you know, I get the impression the motion is likely to fail, is what Mr. Whistle suggested. If that's the consensus of the group, that's fine. I don't want to spin wheels. If the consensus of the group is that, no, we want to see everyone regardless, maybe that's a separate question after this motion is voted on.
Thank you. Any further discussion? If not,
Mrs. Spiros is waving it.
what's that? Oh,
Mrs.
Rebecca, are you wanting to be recognized?
Could you just repeat the motion, please?
Thank you. That's what I was gonna do.
Oh, thank you.
Deb, have you got the motion?
Yes. The motion is to recommend council approval to modify the requirement for committee council approvals to refill vacant positions per the recommendation of the city administrator.
Okay, so if an aye means that we're doing away with the requirement to bring it before the council and the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee, and a nay says keep it up as it is now. Is that correct? Everybody agree with that?
Basically, yeah.
Okay. Okay, we're ready to vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
Was that an aye, Rebecca?
Aye.
Aye, so it's
Yes.
2-3. Okay, thank you. Okay. The next item on the agenda is a request to recommend council approval of the 2022 partnership agreement for the operation of the Marshfield Job Center. It's going to be presented by Steve, but before he does that, I totally forgot this was on the menu tonight. But I'm going to ask Steve to carry, Nick to carry this through, because I sit on the board that approves the other end of this contract. My name will be on it, so. Nick.
I don't think I need
So
a gavel
Steve-
for anything, but.
Well, you might have to gavel Steve down, he gets so
Okay.
rowdy.
Steve, go ahead.
Be kind, okay? For many years, we've had a very good relationship with the North Central Wisconsin Workforce Development Board. They do a great job. And also with the state's Department of Workforce Development to operate the Marshfield Job Center. I know there've been conversations in the past over the years about the effectiveness, but I think over time it's done a good job in terms of reaching out to people seeking jobs, trying to connect them with people who are providing jobs, and certainly the resources that are provided over there, the opportunity to be on the computers and to get some assistance with resume writing is a real benefit to those individuals. The request here is to continue the relationship under this contract for one more year. The dollar amounts would not change. The city pays roughly 3/4 of the freight, $12,500, and North Central Wisconsin Workforce Development pays the other $4,500. And that $17,000 is to pay for the part-time staffing person who works 3 days a week, 6 hours a day. So an 18-hour-a-week position providing that support over there. The only change from last year's contract that I suggested, and it's okay with the folks involved on the other end, is that we modify the top of page 2. Historically, it's referred to a specific amount that would be paid and a CPI adjustment. I thought it better, since we now have a 3+ year lease with North Central Workforce Development, that we would just tie it to their lease. So if you look at the top of page 2, it now says tied to the lease that runs through March 31st of 2024. That doesn't change any terms though. So everything you've seen in the past several years applies with no alterations, and I would recommend approval.
And what's your pleasure?
Move to approve.
Motion by Mr. Hendler, I can't remember your name. And a second by Mr. Whittle. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Abstain. One abstention, and that motion carried.
Thank you.
And I'll hand the gavel back to Mr. Wagner.
Are there any items recommended for future agendas? Mr. Witzel?
I would like to see the revised policy for the approval of positions, as I had mentioned in the discussion of that topic. For the automatic approval of positions, I would like to see a revised plan, again, identifying some key positions and or very small departments that could have automatic approvals of positions without us approving it, but that bigger and I'll let you work out the details.
Are you
I'd like
okay
to
if that
see that back on the agenda?
Yeah, are you okay if that doesn't happen at the next meeting, if it's maybe in February or something?
Do it whenever you want, but I think there's some people that would like it done expeditiously, so I would encourage that, I can keep certain people happy.
I just want to make sure there's time for plenty of thought on
Yes.
the topic.
Yes.
Okay.
Any other items for future agendas? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn by Mr. Witzel, second by Mr. Hendler. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, we stand adjourned.